Field be lifted. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Mark.
Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan began a national debate about a national missile defense system dubbed Star Wars. Then the Soviet Union collapsed and the Cold War ended. Do we still need national missile defense? It's an election year and it's an election issue. Our guests today have reached different answers to that question. Michael O'Hanlon is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and is currently working on a new book, Technological Change and the Future of Warfare. He recently wrote an article in Foreign Affairs entitled Star Wars Strikes Back. George Lewis is Associate Director of the Security Studies Program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. He recently co-authored an article in Foreign Policy titled National Missile Defense, an Indefensible System. And Frank Gaffney, the Director of the Center for Security Policy and a former Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy during the Reagan administration. The topic before the House: do we need a national missile defense? This week on Think Tank.
I call upon the scientific community in our country, those who gave us nuclear weapons, to turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace, to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete.
In the almost 2 decades since Ronald Reagan first proposed the Strategic Defense Initiative called Star Wars, the world has changed. The Berlin Wall was torn down. The Soviet Union, the chief nuclear threat to the United States, no longer exists. But proponents of a national missile defense say the United States and its allies still face some potential nuclear threats. On a small scale, these come from rogue states like Iraq and North Korea. Up a step, the Chinese have an important nuclear fleet, and Russia, although no longer an adversarial superpower, still has a superpower's nuclear arsenal. But those who say no to a national missile defense system argue that it would be too costly, that it might not ever work, and that it could antagonize a Russia in the midst of a tumultuous transition. For the record, the United States currently does have one operating missile defense system, the Patriot, which Americans saw in action during the Gulf War. But that is part of what is called theater missile defense, a local system designed to knock down short-range missiles. That system is fairly uncontroversial, unlike the broader national missile defense. We've asked our experts to help us get to the nucleus of the matter. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. The first question, to set sort of a factual groundwork, is, and let us begin with you, George, and go around the table. What is the threat now to the United States?
Right, talking in terms of national missile defense, I think you summarized it well. I mean, there continues to be a Russian arsenal, which we don't view as adversaries, but still there. China has a smaller arsenal capable of reaching the U.S., and there's a slow growth of capability in the third world, of technologies that could, in the future, and people debate over how quickly, could lead to acquiring a missile capability capable of reaching the U.S.
Okay. Michael, is that about it, or is there some bells and whistles that ought to go with that?
I think that's a good summary of the technical landscape. There's also a political landscape, which is, in what situation is it really plausible that someone would threaten us? And there are a couple of different kinds of concerns. One of them is sort of the crazy Russian officer who's not getting fed and is just mad and nihilistic, sort of an ultimate terrorist within Russia, in a sense. Another possibility is, let's say North Korea or Iraq starts another war, as each has against our friends in their respective regions in the past. Under those circumstances, we would like to have the option of overthrowing their governments. We don't like the idea of just fighting back to a ceasefire line in either one of these places again. But once you start to threaten their capital cities and their regimes, it becomes more plausible for them to trot out the ultimate threat against you. And in that situation is sort of when you can believe that a missile threat might be the most plausible.
Okay, Frank?
We have zero missile defense today. We have an array of countries, some of them that are actual missile-wielding states, capable of threatening us at any time. China, by the way, has done so a couple of years back. We have a number of other countries.
They did this when they
back
shot
in the
that
context
missile
of
into
Taiwan. They were
Yeah.
they were about to go in a ratcheting up of their pressure campaign against Taiwan. And a senior Chinese military officer who is actually recently in Washington told a senior American, we don't think Americans are going to interfere with this campaign because American leaders care more about Los Angeles than they do about Taiwan.
And then your military hero, President Clinton, sent carriers down the strait.
Congress told President Clinton to send carriers down, and he did it.
Congress is
But
not
the
not the commander-in-chief.
The problem that occurred subsequently is the problem that I think Michael's getting at, and that is we start seeing, in the absence of missile defenses on the United States, political results from the kinds of threats that are present or emerging as countries dictate, in effect, whether it's China or North Korea, terms to us. And in the absence of defenses, I believe we're seeing, at least under this administration, and I suspect in the future administrations as well, accommodations being made.
China understands deterrence. I mean, some people may argue that rogue states don't understand deterrence, but I mean, the one thing rogue states understand is their leaders understand how to hold on to power. And there is no doubt that if they launch a ballistic missile attack on the United States, they are not going to be in power.
They're going to be dead. They're going to be dead.
Very
But
quickly.
the deterrence in one man's mind is blackmail in another's. And I think what we were concerned about there was they were deterring us from coming to the defense of democratic Taiwan. That is blackmail that has strategic implications.
But in that case, at least, it didn't work.
Well, it worked in the sense that subsequently Bill Clinton went to China and essentially embraced the entire Chinese line on Taiwan. Yes, we did send carriers down. They nonetheless sent 4 missiles into the waters right off of Taiwan, which had no defense against them. And subsequently, President Clinton backpedaled in ways that I think are strategically significant.
Well, I'm not quite as worried about the China. I grant Frank's point that in broad terms you can devise scenarios that would be of troublesome nature regarding almost any country, certainly including China. I'm really a little more worried about North Korea and Iraq. I really think that these are countries that, as George says, do understand deterrence, but in the end, they may be willing, if they decide they can get away with an aggression and make that mistake, that we prove them wrong and we want to take out these regimes. North Korea has been presiding over mass starvation of its own people. The world would be a much better place if North Korea's regime was gone. Same thing, of course, with Saddam Hussein. Right now, I don't believe it warrants the loss of American life to overthrow those regimes, but if they start another war, I think we'd like to finish the job. We don't want them to have the ultimate ability to blackmail us, deter us from doing so by threatening a nuclear strike. So for me, that's the most compelling scenario.
Okay, so you have, as we like to say, an uncertain world where we are the super-duper power, but we can be threatened on a macro level, on a sub-macro level, and even, as we hear, on a micro level. Ergo, what do we do about it? And again, let's have a brief opener and then we can talk about it. Frank, we'll go around the room this way.
Well, I would not do what President Clinton is proposing to do, which is to put a small number of missile interceptors in Alaska, which will not protect all of the United States and will not protect much of this country against much of an attack.
This is
the so-called National Missile Defense System that he might decide to deploy sometime in the summer.
Right. Summer of year 2000.
Correct. I would instead adapt the infrastructure that the American people have already bought and paid for, which is 55 ships known as Aegis cruisers and destroyers that represent essentially the makings of a global anti-missile capability. We're currently at a very low level and slow pace adapting them to shoot down short-range missiles. I would immediately move to deploy much more capable systems aboard those ships to defend us at home as well as our forces and allies overseas. A sea-based missile defense that I think has a great deal more flexibility. It can be deployed, I believe, much faster, and it costs a fraction because we've already bought the infrastructure.
What's wrong with that?
Well, let me say that there are some good attributes to this idea. But first of all, the Pentagon believes it would be, the Pentagon's looked at it and was taken enough by the analysis that was done by the Heritage Foundation Study Group to consider this idea very seriously. They think, however, it would be a much more difficult thing to develop technologically, that it would take longer and be much more expensive. But it still may be, in the longer term, a useful adjunct to what they're developing now.
So they are looking in their NMD, National Missile Defense, at to begin with, a land-based system in Alaska.
Right.
To catch stuff. That's basically North Korean, is what you're talking about.
That's China, perhaps some Russian.
Yeah, but I mean...
But not much coming
It has
from
a
the west,
theoretical
from the east,
capability
to the
from
west.
the east.
Right. So they think it's, the Pentagon thinks it's a good idea, but not a good enough idea to go all the way on that.
That's right. And then there's also the big other dimension of this, which is the U.S.-Russia arms control dimension. And I would probably tend to agree with Frank that we shouldn't put traditional arms control necessarily on such a high mantra that we use it as a way to block missile defense. However, I am worried about Russia's nuclear weapons safety and security. And I want to keep going these U.S.-Russian collaborative programs that help us consolidate, protect, secure Russian nuclear weapons. And I think those could be a jeopardy if we deploy too big of a defense too fast.
Okay, who here feels capable of giving a brief and neutral summary of the anti-ballistic missile treaty so that we can factually know what it is that Michael was just talking about? Can you do it?
The anti-ballistic missile treaty forbids both the U.S. and Russia from deploying a national defense of their entire country. I mean, I think that's the issue.
That was passed in 1973.
Signed and ratified in 72.
72.
And there's other prohibitions that, you
Right.
know, on, there's other prohibitions, but that's the main issue. It says you cannot deploy a national missile defense of your entire
You can research it, and
you can research it, you can develop it.
You can
Some development. You can deploy a single site for a limited defense of a limited area. But
In our case, in North Dakota.
or you could move it to D.C. But the main
Does that make
issue
it more
here-
or less dangerous to live here if you
That's
have the?
a
if you have
controversial point.
When Ronald Reagan promulgated the idea of Star Wars, it was said that that violated the ABM Treaty. Is that right?
So it would have.
It would have,
It was a
certainly.
territorial defense, and in fact, I think all of the approaches that we're now talking about would as well.
But Reagan didn't violate the treaty on his watch, even if, I mean, he would still have been developing it and researching it. Had it ever reached fruition, then it would have violated it. Is that the idea? So it was a proposal that would, in the long run, involve some negotiation between the United States and the Soviet Union, in theory.
I think Reagan, I don't think Reagan saw this as something that we would modify the treaty. I think he saw this as something that would supplant the whole idea behind
And
it.
he would legally serve notice and get out of the
Sure.
ABM Treaty.
We're entitled to do that under the treaty, but the larger question is, if the other party to the treaty went away, you mentioned in your intro that some changes have taken place since 1972, not least of which is that there is no Soviet Union. It was formally and officially dismantled, and legal analysis that I believe is beyond reproach concludes that under international law, in these kinds of circumstances, you have to create a new treaty in order for a new party, in this case Russia, to supplant the old Soviet Union.
You guys
it's
buy
not
that?
the same country, it's not the same geography, it's not the same capabilities, and therefore you have to have new understandings with them, and we don't have them yet.
Michael, what's wrong with that?
Well, Russia has taken on many of the international treaty obligations of the former Soviet Union, so one can have this legal debate. But for me, I would rather focus on the political fundamentals. The SDI program of Reagan was competitive vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. It was designed, and some would argue it was successful, in essentially defeating the Soviet Union in one way or another. Today, most of us who support missile defense deployment want to do it in a way that's cooperative with Russia, provided, of course, that Russia is willing to talk and compromise. But it's not a competitive relationship vis-a-vis Russia for most of us anymore in the missile defense
Is
question.
it competitive in your view?
Well, it's competitive in the sense that the Russians continue to say that they want the United States to have no missile defense. They do not see any reason to change the ABM treaty. They do not support the deployment of an American missile defense. I think this is particularly galling since they actually have one of their own, not just the legal one.
The one in
but an illegal
Krasnoyarsk?
one. No, they had a radar that they subsequently took down, one around Moscow. But
is that
beyond
right?
that, they have additional
have a legal
capabilities that are
one.
prohibited.
They have a legal one.
Right.
Do we have a legal one?
We have none. Zero.
We
Zero.
built it briefly, and then we operated it for a few months in 1975, and we turned it off.
Where?
In North Dakota.
But Ben, the point is that today we now have, thanks to the publication of memoirs and other Soviet-era documents, the testimony of the people who designed the then Soviet missile defense system, and they make it absolutely clear that what they were building was not just a legal system around Moscow, but a comprehensive territorial defense using what were described to us as, and nominally legal as, air defense interceptors.
Can you view the system you're talking about, this sea-based system, as one that the Russians, not the Soviets, the Russians, could benefit from and could cooperate with, or is this just saying you're out of here?
No,
and
I think it could conceivably be the case that they could cooperate with us and benefit from it if they are in fact no longer going to oppose the American people being defended from the potential threats that, let's be honest, are emanating from countries that we regard as rogues and the Russians regard as clients. These are countries that China is selling missiles to, North Korea is itself selling missiles to, the Russians are providing missile technology to. They have an interest, in short, in keeping us vulnerable because it keeps the value of their export commodity, which is missile technology, higher. They do not have an interest in sharing our technology, I believe, and cooperating with us in
I
having
think many people, I think there's a certain wing of people who are supportive of missile defense who would like to see it proceed cooperatively with Russia. Clearly, that's not what's happening now. And for example, with the current administration, it's not like they went to Russia and said, let's talk about how, we have this problem with North Korea. We want to solve it with a missile defense. Let's talk about how we can do this in a way that won't disrupt our relationship. Instead, we went to them and said, this is what we're doing. You agree to it, or we withdraw from the treaty. That's not the kind of thing that's going to lead to cooperation. Maybe cooperation with Russia will be possible. Maybe it won't, but it's not the way we're going.
But if you're really interested in cooperation with Russia, honestly, having dealt with them at some length during the period I was in the Reagan administration, I think it's clear. If we make it known to them, we're going ahead. We're deploying this. They will understand that then there's a system perhaps with which they can cooperate. At the moment, they are in a position, amazingly enough, I think incredible even to them, of vetoing our program by simply saying yet. That doesn't create conditions for cooperation.
I have always, when I have this discussion, try to figure out, here's 1, 2, 3 smart, patriotic, loyal, intelligent, well-educated people.
Good looking,
obviously concerned at a real situation, and you come out on very different wavelengths. You say we shouldn't build it. You say, well, maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. There's something we can do. It's not such a bad idea. And you say,
we're out of time.
We're out of time. Okay. Now, what is the different basis of your views? And you're allowed to characterize the other person in this part of the discussion.
For me, I think the biggest thing is a faith in technology. I think a lot of people believe that if we build this system, it's going to work. And I just do not see, and I'm talking here in particular about what the administration is planning to do, I just don't see that it's going to work. There are other things you could do that would probably work better. There's other things you could do that would not have the effect perhaps of perturbing the Russians and the Chinese so much.
Are you in general a technological pessimist?
On this issue, yes. In general, no.
You have to wonder why. Why on this issue would a technologist be a Luddite? I have the feeling it has to do with faith in arms control, and that's where I disagree. We're looking at a world in which arms control is frankly irrelevant. The countries that we are worried about are countries that mock us for our confidence in arms control, have no intention of adhering to agreements, past or future.
Now, which ones are you talking about?
I'm talking about
Russia?
the whole array of them. Russia has violated every agreement it's entered into. China, ditto, and you go on down the laundry list.
Is that right?
The larger problem is...
No, it's not right.
If arms control is not a runner, and I think that's pretty convincingly clear, you have to work to do the best you can to provide defenses. Is technology perfect and infallible? Of course not. But I guarantee you, Ben, that if this country is attacked by one of these rascals with a missile, we will not be debating the technical merits of one approach or another. We will not be debating the costs of trying to defend ourselves. And we sure as hell won't be talking about the merits of the ABM treaty. We'll be deploying what we can deploy.
Mike, is that the pivot of the differential in viewpoint, a belief in arms control?
No, I want to come to George's defense because he's a real technical expert on this subject. And if he's saying he doesn't think the technology will work, it's because he doesn't think the technology will work. And he's looked in detail at what missile technology can do and the kinds of decoys that you can add to these threats to make it hard for a radar to tell a warhead from a fake warhead. And that's compelling.
No, I understand. But do you think that he and you have what Frank would call a naive faith in arms control?
No.
Let me be very clear. I do not think that arms control can prevent countries from acquiring ballistic missiles and nuclear weapons.
So you guys agree on something?
Well, if one agrees, then one has to extrapolate from that. So what do you do if you're not going to be able to place your faith in arms control? And I suggest that technologists, smart technologists, capable technologists, creative technologists will understand that you do what you can do, because the alternative is a country that is at the mercy of the Kim Jong-ils or the Saddam Husseins or the Muammar Gaddafis or the Hafez Assads of this world. That's an intolerable situation as they do get the capability to attack us.
Is that a eloquent overstatement?
Well, it's an eloquent statement. I just think that I would add some other points. I believe, in the end, there's a good chance that North Korea, Iran, and Iraq will not be able to develop the decoys that are needed to overwhelm a limited defense, and therefore I support that limited defense. Meanwhile, I think Russia and even China probably will be able to. So I actually, in a strange way, I'm a technological optimist because I sort of feel like you can get the medium solution here, the Goldilocks solution, a technology that is pretty good against the countries you really should fear, but actually not that good against the countries that you need to work with.
Okay.
But let me just point out that the last national intelligence estimate said China and Russia will probably be willing to sell these decoys to these countries.
Last question. This has become a political issue in this election year. It may become a greater political issue. Could you all just briefly discuss and describe the differences of approach between the parties and the candidates?
I think the Republicans are clearly supportive of missile defense and supportive well beyond what we're talking about doing, making a decision on this summer. Clinton has his plan to make a decision this summer. I don't know what he's going to do. Probably something sort of wishy-washy.
They've had two tests. One worked, one didn't work. Is that where we are?
Second one failed. The first one hit the target. People have raised some questions about exactly what happened in that test, but it did hit the target.
But I mean, they hit a missile with it. They hit a bullet with a bullet.
And not for the first time.
They hit a warhead with a homing kill vehicle.
And they came within 100 feet of the second one, and some sensors failed.
Is that the right political array? The Republicans are for it. The Democrats are punting.
I think Bradley is against it, I do believe.
Do you follow that?
Gore is for it, but perhaps in a strange effort to protect his political flank, because historically Republicans have been more supportive of this than Democrats. In a way, he's rushing. He's part of the Clinton-Gore idea that says we should make a decision on this during the summer of the year 2000, which I think is a terrible idea. A, the technology is not ready. B, you should let the next U.S. president think of a broader policy towards Russia. In a strange way, even though I tend to be more supportive of the arms control approach, I like George Bush's idea better, which is wait until 2001. Now, I think that's still going to be too soon, but it's better than trying to make this decision in 2000.
Okay, thank you, George Lewis, Frank Gaffney, and Michael O'Hanlon. And thank you, We at Think Tank encourage feedback from our viewers via email. It's very important to us. One viewer, David Riav, recently posed this question about election 2000. Agree or disagree, all 4 major candidates for president are running for Clinton's 3rd term. Well, David, that's one legitimate interpretation. Others might say they're all running for Ronald Reagan's 6th term. Thanks for writing. For Think Tank, I'm Ben Wattenberg.
We at Think Tank depend on your views to make our show better. Please send your questions and comments to New River Media, 1219 Connecticut Avenue Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20036. Or email us at thinktank@pbs.org. To learn more about Think Tank, visit PBS online at pbs.org. And please let us know where you watch Think Tank. This has been a production of BJW Incorporated, in association with New River Media, which are solely responsible for its content.